In this episode of Down to Earth, has the great climate migration already begun? Sea level rise, extreme weather and drought. Thousands are driven across borders.
We had nothing. We were so hungry we used rocks attached to a cord and tied it around our stomach to ease the pain.
By 2050, 200 million people could be displaced by the environment. Where will they go? There's no refugee status for victims of climate change.
The tragedy is that this population, which is obliged to move, doesn't have a legal framework of protection like refugees do.
A major security risk for the future. Will competition for resources spur conflict?
Climate change constitutes a serious threat to global security. And make no mistake, it will impact how our military defends our country.
Down to earth in far northwest Kenya, on a land that has welcomed 180,000 people in the last 2 decades. Most have fled violence in their war-torn countries, but a smaller proportion are here because their homeland has changed. The climate no longer supports a livelihood, and so they cross the border and end up here in a refugee camp. We call them environmental migrants.
They play football after school as their mother watches on. AMINA and her 5 children arrived in Kenya from Somalia in 2011. The journey included 20 days with no food, stranded in the jungle.
We spotted a dead camel by the riverbed. We decided to eat it, and it made the children sick. They had severe diarrhea and started vomiting after eating the meat, but we still ate it. After 20 days of hardship, a truck arrived and offered to take us to the Kenyan border.
AMINA left behind her the horn of Africa's most crushing drought in 60 years. 260,000 people died in Somalia alone, half of them young children.
There's nothing to eat in a drought. It's a famine, and there's no rain. If it doesn't rain, how can we grow any food? The land doesn't produce anything, so we're starving.
Kenya has a reputation as a generous host country. In 2015, nearly 500,000 Somalians will be sheltered, fed and treated in Kenyan refugee camps. Because of the war back home, they're given automatic refuge, but it's not always the real reason they're here.
A lot of people now are being displaced in the refugee camps, not only because of conflict, but because of drought. They are coming to seek assistance in terms of water, food, health care, and of course, education for their children, because in the camp, at least there's some level of services which are being provided that meets the humanitarian standards.
Can we expect to see more people arriving in Kenyan refugee camps because of the climate back at home?
Yes, because right now, because of unpredictable climatic condition, the changes in climate, more and more refugees are expected to arrive in this camp, in other camps of in the Horn of Africa, and we are getting ready to be able to respond.
Ask any of the refugees why they're here and they'll tell you life is impossible in Somalia. Is it the conflict or the drought? For 29-year-old IBRAHIM and his family, it's both.
When the famine started, there were people with weapons who blocked the road. Whenever they were hungry, they would come and attack us farmers. They would take our belongings, our possessions. We had nothing. We were so hungry that we used rocks attached to a cord and tied it around our stomach to ease the pain. We didn't want to finish the little water we had. Water was our only source of food.
AMINA and IBRAHIM are among the 60 million people displaced in 2014, an all-time record. Some flee south to Australia and New Zealand, others north to the United States. But the massive influx has come from Africa and the Middle East, across the Mediterranean. Somalians, side by side with Syrians, Sudanese, Eritreans. All of them so desperate to flee they'll tempt the treacherous journey to Europe.
Nobody really has been asking how many of these people have lost everything because of drought, and with the last money they could gather, they started to move towards Europe. We do not know how many families have sent off one of their younger family members on this very precarious and very dangerous route because they have lost hope, basically.
When the Geneva Refugee Convention was signed in 1951, there was no mention of climate change. 60 years later, the Swiss and Norwegian governments launched the Nansen Initiative. With the help of the UN, they're looking for ways to protect people forcibly displaced by the environment and rescue them from a legal abyss.
The tragedy is that this population which is obliged to move, the majority, mind you, stay in their country, but those who cross borders don't have a legal framework of protection like refugees who left because of political reasons or persecution of a different nature. There's a void in terms of their protection.
These are persons who are to some extent neglected, yes. They are neglected because they fall through the cracks of existing international law. And we see that, for instance, insofar as when we're talking about people moving across borders, we don't have specific exact figures. And the reason is what is not defined is not being counted.
It's often difficult to determine why these migrants are moving. War, famine, the environment, or increasingly, a combination. A paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences argues that the uprising in Syria was partly driven by the worst drought in the country's modern history, the lack of resources creating conditions ripe for conflict.
Famine and failing agriculture are food security issues that can fuel conflicts. Hunger is a powerful driving force of revolutions. The French Revolution began from a famine in the countryside. The Arab Spring started out as a protest over rising food prices. So I don't think we should underestimate famine as a potential instigator of revolution.
Natural disasters are also forcing people from their homes, an average of 27 million per year. Cyclones, torrential rains, flooding. In November 2013, Typhoon Haiyan killed more than 6,000 people in the Philippines. Hundreds of thousands of survivors are yet to recover.
We've always had natural disasters. We've always had floods. We've always had hurricanes. But now they're more frequent, more intense, and the humanitarian consequences are more tragic.
There are efforts around the world to recognise the climate as a legitimate claim for refuge. For the moment, none of them has worked. In Italy, where tens of thousands of migrants first land in Europe, one lawyer is determined to challenge the status quo without waiting for a new refugee convention.
I think we're obliged to offer these people real protection, welcome them, and give them the possibility of a new life. That's why it's important to create a precedent, to use existing legal tools to help the refugees now, so they don't have to wait for many years.
Mohammed PUNCHU is among those who needs help now. The 26-year-old from Bangladesh learns Italian while awaiting the outcome of his appeal for asylum. He landed in Italy last year after 5 days at sea, leaving behind the difficult life of a farmer.
In Bangladesh, there's a lot of rain, and when it rains, the river bursts, and the sides of the river overflow. The river's very strong, and it takes the land, grabs it, and drags it into the ocean with force. This is what I used to see.
When the rivers rise in Bangladesh, so too does the tension. One day a group of men ordered Mohammed's family give up their land. When his father and brother refused, they were killed. As his lawyer, Anna says he is a victim of climate change.
Obviously, it's not a direct link. But because of climate change, there is less land available. And the consequence is that there is more violence within the community.
Violenza all'interno dei villaggi. Devo convincere il giudice.
I have to convince the judge that he's part of a particular social group and that climate change and its consequences have caused damages to this particular social group, a group that isn't able to receive protection from the state's authorities.
Che non può ottenere alcuna protezione dall'autorità del suo stato di appartenenza.
Less rapid than a flash flood, but with equally dramatic consequences. Rising sea levels are also threatening entire populations. It's prompted the government of Kiribati to launch the Migration with Dignity project, training its people in skills needed to work abroad. As an alternative, President Anote Tong has paid nearly $9 million for a parcel of land in Fiji.
These people want, if they have to move, to do it before the disaster strikes. They want to be, if it's necessary as a measure of last recourse, to be relocated in organized ways so that they can participate.
It raises a tremendous amount of questions and challenges, especially relating to human rights, but I think preparing earlier will offer the advantage of limiting trauma among the displaced populations.
But what if we limit the need to move? We're back in Kenya near Lake Victoria. Here, there's also been a notable change in the climate. When it rains, it pours, but often it doesn't rain at all. The solution in the community of Nyando is to turn the village into a lab.
This here is known as a climate-smart farm filled with new varieties of local crops like these cowpeas. Bred by scientists, they can withstand those long reoccurring dry spells as well as flooding, the latest arsenal in the long-running combat with climate change.
Today's class for local farmers has a familiar theme.
Thank you very much for coming. Now, why we are here is, climate change. All of us know that climate has changed. What can we do about it?
Here, the participants are taught how to grow crop varieties naturally selected because of their ability to thrive in the current conditions. They learn when to plant, how to space seeds, and ultimately maximise their harvest.
You are a good student.
Farmers here like to eat cowpeas, a bean-like vegetable previously adapted to this climate. Now they're encouraged to grow a new hybrid variety.
Previously, where rainfall would be available for about 90 days, now it's available for a shorter period, and therefore these crops can end up growing within a 60-day period and have a better yield coming out of it, so which basically means they help the farmers have that kind of resilience.
Smart breeds of plants, but also animals. This powerful-looking goat with a pure white coat is being crossed with the local variety. Hailing from Kenya's arid far north, the Gala can tolerate heat and drought and matures more quickly. Its nickname, the super goat.
When you compare a local East African goat and a Gala goat, you will realize that the weight of the local East African goat is about half of the Gala goat. So this gives an idea of how the Gala goats can thrive within this kind of environment.
At the market, a local goat crossed with a Gala attracts double the price of ordinary goats. They're so popular, the crossbreeds are expected to replace the other varieties in the next 5 years. The community of Nyando is now better braced to endure the next episode of drought. Not all Kenyans are in the same position. Back in Kakuma, we meet the Turkana, a nomadic tribe that shares this desertic land with the refugees. Normally, this community would be moving their animals, but they've lost them to the drought. Now their only source of water, the few wells built by aid agencies. Their only source of income, charcoal and firewood, which they sell to the refugees.
Every morning I walk into the bush to collect firewood. I bring it back here from the hills and organize it into these bundles, and then take them to the refugee camp. For every bundle, I get 1 cup of food. I put it all in a bag, I bring it home, cook for my children, sleep, and then do it all again tomorrow.
The Turkana are the country's poorest tribe. Because they're from Kenya, not war-riddled Somalia, they're excluded from the benefits of the nearby camp. These now stationary nomads look at the refugees with envy.
If you're hungry and you're a refugee like the ones at the camp, they bring food to you while you just sit there. How can you think that's bad? They bring you the firewood without you having to do anything. The refugees have it good.
Not everyone affected by climate change will cross a border. Whether they're Turkana, Somalian or Bangladeshi, these people will seek protection. A refuge for the short term or much longer, when returning home is not